Hello and welcome to Ben Ross's Conservatorium of Audio. I'm Ben Rosser and today we're going to be taking a look at compressors. Compressors belong to the dynamics processing family of effects, which are used to adjust the dynamic range of a sound. The dynamic range is basically the difference between the quietest and the loudest part of a sound, and you'll generally find it expressed in a decibel ratio. Compressors are used to turn down the louder parts of a sound, whether you've got peaky transients coming through or if you're recording a vocalist and the difference between their quiet singing and their loud singing is too great. You can use a compressor to be able to get the dynamic range under control. You'll find, as with pretty much any effect that you're working with, there is a few different ways to use it, whether you're using it more subtly as a tool to try and make something sound a little better, or whether you're using it in a more extreme way as more of an effect and something that is more of an audible creative decision, or if you're quite simply just putting a compressor on the sound because the particular tone it has is good for getting the results you're after. So there's a few different ways to use them, and we're going to have a look at a few different ways today. So the first thing we'll do is we'll get a little bit of audio happening. We might start with getting a bit of a kick drum loop and applying some compression to that to see how much more punchy and how much more life we can add to the sound. So we'll just grab hold of our loop and hit play on that so we can hear what it sounds like. And just bring it down to a more reasonable tempo there. So as we can hear, these drums are a little bit muddy, a little bit flabby. So before we actually apply the compression, we're just going to add a little bit of EQ just to tidy the sound up a little, and just to help us make sure that any of the frequencies that we're not going to want in there aren't there, because otherwise they would also be triggering the compressor and we mightn't get as much of a desirable sound. One of the things you should feel free to experiment with is whether you put your EQ before the compressor, in which case, like I said, you'll remove all of the unwanted sound before the compressor and won't have it triggering the compressor. But you can sometimes find that you'll get quite a nice sound and quite a good effect if you apply the EQ after the compression. So we'll just grab our EQ. As I said, we're just going to add this one before the compression just to tidy up this kick sound a little. Just take out some of that tubbiness. So basically we're boosting the lower end, the main fundamental part of the kick, and give it that thumpiness down in the bottom end. To give it a little bit more clarity, we're just bringing out some of the top end, some of the more attacky part of the kick, and we're just taking out some of the tubbiness and the muddiness around the 400 to 500 kilohertz mark there, as you can see, sitting on about 495 hertz. So what we're now going to do is we're just going to grab a standard Ableton compressor. We're going to use this one in this example because it's a fairly transparent compressor and can do a pretty good job without being that audible, without you even realizing that compression has been applied. So the main controls of a compressor are your threshold, which adjusts when the compressor will start to trigger based on the incoming audio. You've also got a ratio control, which basically adjusts how much you're compressing, and you've also got an attack and release control. The attack determines how quickly the compressor will react after the sound goes above the threshold, and the release will determine how quickly the compressor will let go once the sound drops back down below the threshold. Most compressors also give you a couple of other controls, including an output control or a gain makeup control. Generally called that as when you're attenuating or reducing the gain of the louder peaks, it then allows you to make up some gain. So if you're reducing your peaks by, for example, 6 decibels, it allows you to bring the overall level up by about 6 decibels without clipping. So it allows you to make up about 6 decibels of gain, in other words, just so you can understand the terminology a little better. As we can see, the Ableton compressor also has a makeup button. With that one turned on, it will automatically adjust the output of the compressor to make up for the amount of attenuation that we're getting. And with that one turned off, we can then use the output control to adjust that one manually. There is also a couple of different modes which determine how the compressor actually reads the incoming audio level. And by adjusting between those different modes, you'll find that you can get a little bit of a different sound or a little bit of a different effect from the compressor. For example, with this Ableton compressor, I tend to find that if I use the opto mode, that I can get a bit more compression and a bit better sound without it attacking as many of the high frequencies. So tend to get a slightly clearer sound out of it when using the opto mode. So because we're working with a fairly percussive sound, we're going to start with about 25 millisecond or so attack and probably about a 50 millisecond or so release time. And I'm going to go for about a 4:1 compression ratio to start off with. So now that we've got those few set up, we'll hit play and we'll adjust our threshold to suit the audio. So as you can see, every time the input level's going above the threshold, we're getting some gain reduction. You can see in the compression displays, both with the green dot moving along our compression graph there, and also in our gain reduction meter. You can see how much level is actually being taken away from the sound. So as I said, if we then switch from peak mode to opto mode, you should be able to hear the high frequencies open up just that little bit. And also giving us a bit more of a punchy sort of in-your-face sound. So if we take that compressor back off, you'll notice that it's a little bit more dull and lifeless without it. If we bring that one back in, it's helping to add that little bit of extra punch and life to the overall sound. One of my other favourite ways to use a compressor is not so much for dynamics control as what we're doing in this case, but more as an effect. So to have a bit of a look at that one, we're just going to get rid of these couple of effects. And we're just going to find ourselves another audio loop. Might even just go for the good old amen break for this one, as it tends to be quite good for it. And one of the things you'll find, especially with breaks like this or with recorded drum sounds, if you've got a really nice lush room sort of reverb happening, then one of the ways that you can really accentuate it is with a bit of compression. And to get the effect to really stand out, you generally be a bit more harsh with the sound than you would be normally. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to find ourselves a bit of a different compressor to use with this one. For example, we might even go for one of the Waves compressors. We'll try the Renaissance compressor and we'll see how that goes for us. So again, because it's fairly percussive, we'll go for fairly similar settings. We might even leave the release up closer to 100 because of the fact that we're trying to retain the reverb tail from the particular sound. And we're going to go for a fairly crazy ratio to start off with. Again, this is just a starting point, almost like having a preset to work from. And you generally should be making adjustments as you're listening back to the sound as well, just to fine-tune everything to suit. So if we then play this one, just bring down our threshold. You'll notice it's taken away a fair bit of the sound. We're getting just over 12 decibels worth of gain reduction. But as soon as we bring up the output gain or the makeup gain on this one, you'll start to hear the sort of effect that we're after. So I hope to see you again in another Ben Ross's Conservatorium of Audio tutorial. Thanks for watching.